Hi, my name is Anna, and throughout this presentation, we will review Chapter 21C, Miscellaneous Prevailing Wages. It's also known as non-construction related prevailing wages. It applies to contractors or entities that perform covered work under a contract, lease, or management agreement at city-owned facilities or properties. So what exactly is prevailing wage? Well, prevailing wage is the total hourly wages and benefits that are paid for a particular craft, classification, or type of work that's performed. The total hourly wage rate is comprised of the basic hourly rate, which also includes overtime and holiday pay, and benefits such as pension, vacation, health and welfare, etc. Chapter 21C is unique to San Francisco. It establishes 10 prevailing wage classifications that are not recognized by the California Department of Industrial Relations. It's not public works, and it's non-construction related. It applies to San Francisco service contracts, leases, management agreements, and permits. It also applies to work that's performed at any facility or property that is owned or leased by the city. Listed on the screen are the 10 prevailing wage classifications and the year that they were passed by the Board of Supervisors. The categories include motor bus services, which was passed in 1999, janitorial services, which was also passed in 1999, work at parking lots and garages, which was passed in 2003, theatrical services was passed in 2004, solid waste hauling was passed in 2006, moving services was passed in 2004. Trade show and special event work was passed in 2014. And in 2016, we have broadcast services, loading and unloading, as well as security guard services. To obtain the prevailing wage rates, please visit OLSC's website that's listed on the screen here. Some of the classifications may have exemptions. I will let you know whether exemptions apply as we review the details for each of the classifications later on. Also, the wage rates may be adjusted annually, so please be sure to check out the OLSC website often to ensure that you're using the correct wage rates. Beneath the web link is a sample screenshot of OLSC's webpage to access the wage chart. The right-hand column, as you will see here in red, has the individual links to the wage rates for each of the corresponding classifications. There are two classifications under janitorial services. We have janitors and window cleaners. Let's take a look at the wage determination for janitors. Here is an example of the sample wage determination for janitors. As you will see, the basic hourly rate plus fringe benefits equals the total hourly rate. There are different wage rates depending on the worker's employment duration. For janitorial services, we look at the total number of hours that the employee has worked for the employer. Make sure to also pay attention to the hours that are listed under the straight time column. Note that time and a half overtime payment applies after 7.5 hours of work rather than the typical 8-hour workday. Footnotes listed at the bottom of the wage determination are also important as it provides information such as additional payments for certain type of work that's performed, observed holidays which require overtime payment, health and welfare calculations, etc. This is an example of the security guard services wage determination. If you recall, the janitorial services wage determination looked at the number of hours that the employee worked for the employer to calculate which rate applies. However, security guard service wage rates are determined by the date that the employee began employment. This is an example of the theatrical workers' wage determination. These wage rates are based on the scope of work that's performed. As you can see, the 3 different sample wage determinations each utilize different methods to determine the wage rates. Therefore, I would like to remind you to please read the tables and the footnotes carefully. Let's take a look at each of the classifications. Motor bus services prevailing wage applies to any contract that's issued on or after July 2nd of 1999 for motor bus services on city property. There are no exemptions. The total hourly rate, including fringes for a double-decker bus driver, is $42.54 per hour. For any employee working a split shift, the basic hourly rate shall include a 15% premium for the basic hourly rate. A split shift is defined as any shift with an unpaid period of greater than 4 hours. Janitorial services prevailing wage applies to any contract that is signed with the city on or after January 16th of 2004 for janitorial services on city property. Exemptions apply. There are different rates depending on the number of hours worked. For example, if the employee worked for the employer for more than 4,850 hours, the total hourly rate, including fringes, is currently $34.12 per hour. This includes $9 for health and welfare contribution for an employee who worked for an employer for at least 3 months and a minimum of 105 hours in the previous month. 7.5 hours constitute a full workday, so any work beyond 7.5 hours shall be paid at the overtime rate. Window cleaner is a subclassification of janitorial services, and prevailing wage applies to this classification for any contract signed with the city on or after December 13th of 2007 for professional window cleaning services on city property. Exemptions apply. The current total hourly rate, including fringes for a base cleaner, is $39.48 per hour. This includes $9.27 for health and welfare contribution if the employee worked for an employer for at least 975 hours and a minimum of 75 hours in the previous month. Note that the health and welfare contribution rate for a window cleaner is slightly higher than that of a janitor, although they both fall under the janitorial services category. However, similar to janitors, window cleaners also have a 7.5-hour workday, so any work beyond 7.5 hours shall be paid at the overtime rate. Prevailing wage applies to any contract signed with the city on or after June 20th, 2003 for the operation of off-street parking lots and garages that are owned or leased by the city. There are no exemptions. The current total hourly rate, including fringes for a parking employee, is $38.81 per hour. This includes $8.64 for health and welfare contribution if the employee worked for an employer for at least 6 months and a minimum of 120 hours in the previous month. Theatrical service prevailing wage applies to any contract, lease, or permit that is issued on or after September 30th, 2004 for the use of city property. Exemptions apply. The current total hourly rate, including fringes for traditional stagecraft, is $74.13 per hour. This includes $8.74 for the health and welfare contribution. All time shall be computed in 1-hour increments, so any fraction of an hour shall constitute 1 hour of pay. Prevailing wage applies to city contracts that are awarded on or after March 9th, 2007 for garbage collectors and drivers that are hauling solid waste generated by the city. Exemptions apply. The current total hourly rate, including fringes for a commercial driver or a route lead person, is $85.43 per hour. This includes $13.25 for health and welfare contribution if the employee completed 30 days of employment and a minimum of 80 hours in the previous month. Moving services prevailing wage applies to contracts issued on or after December 14th of 2004 by the city for moving services on city property. Exemptions apply. The current total hourly rate, including fringes for a mover, packer, crater, or a helper, is $35.92 per hour. This includes $10.55 for health and welfare contribution. Furniture modular installers shall be paid according to the DIR's prevailing wage rate. Trade show and special event work prevailing wage applies to any contract, lease, or permit that is granted by the city on or after June 18, 2015 for the use of city property. Exemptions apply. The current total hourly rate, including fringes for a journey person installer, is $70.96 per hour. This includes $13.05 for health and welfare contribution. Premium pay applies to swing stage operators or work that is performed over a certain height. Broadcast services prevailing wage applies to contracts, leases, or permits that are issued by the city on or after February 10, 2017 for the use of city property. Examples include broadcasters working on commercial productions on city property. Exemptions apply. The current total hourly rate, including fringes for an audio mixer, is $102.68 per hour. This includes $9.16 for health and welfare contribution. The daily minimum call is 10 hours, which is comprised of a 1-hour paid meal break, 8 hours of straight time, and 1 hour of time and a half overtime. Meal breaks shall begin within 6 hours of the start time. If a meal break is not given by the 6th hour, then the employee shall be paid at a time and a half rate for 1 hour. Loading and unloading prevailing wage applies to contracts, leases, or permits that are issued by the city on or after February 24th of 2017 for the use of city property. Covered workers include individuals engaged in the loading or unloading or driving of a commercial vehicle with at least 6 wheels in connection with the presentation of a show or special event. Exemptions apply. The current total hourly rate, including fringes for a driver, is $65.43 per hour. The total hourly rate for a forklift operator is $64.64, and the rate for helpers is $64.30. All of these total hourly rates include $15.34 for health and welfare contribution. Security guard services prevailing wage applies to contracts that are signed with the city on or after June 2nd of 2017 for security guard services on city property. Exemptions apply. Security officer wage rates depend on the start date. For example, the current total hourly rate, including fringes for a security officer that was hired after January 1st of 2021 is $20.36 per hour. This includes $3.66 for health and welfare for a single employee with 90 days of service. Please note that depending on whether or not the worker has dependents, the health and welfare rate may change. Amendments to extend current contracts under the Minimum Compensation Ordinance, known as MCO, or the Healthcare Accountability Ordinance, known as HCAO, will trigger security guard services prevailing wage rates. There are no waivers for health and welfare contribution. The HCAO waiver provision does not apply to prevailing wage. The Healthcare Security Ordinance, known as HCSO, may apply if the employer has more than 20 employees. Lastly, let's talk about 21C.7. This is not a prevailing wage classification, but it does apply to all contracts, leases, agreements, or permits under Chapter 21C.1 through 21C.11. When a contracting officer has given notice that a covered contract will be advertised for bid, or when a contractor has given notice of termination, Within 10 days upon giving or receiving such notice, the ending contractor shall provide the contracting officer and the purchaser the name, date of hire, total number of hours and months that the employee worked for the employer, wage rate, and employment occupation classification for each employee who worked at least 15 hours per week for the ending contractor. This provision shall also apply to subcontractors of the ending contractor. The new contractor is required to retain the ending contractor's employees for a 6-month transition employment period. If the employee's performance during the transition period is satisfactory, then the successor contractor shall offer continued employment to that employee. OLSC does not enforce this provision, but individuals can file with the Superior Court to pursue legal action. Here are some of the most frequently asked questions. The first question is, if my employees are not scheduled to work on a holiday, do I still need to pay them? The answer is yes. Employees are entitled to receive holiday pay regardless of whether or not they are scheduled to work. What rate do I need to pay my employees who work on a holiday? Well, work that's performed on a named holiday is paid at the time-and-a-half overtime rate, and any work that's performed beyond 8 hours shall be paid at the double time rate. I am a medium-sized employer. Does HCSO apply to me? If the employer has 20 or more employees, HCSO may apply. Please contact the HCSO team for details. This concludes the presentation. As a reminder, please pay attention to the footnotes on the wage chart. Pay workers according to the type of work that's performed. Keep accurate payroll records, and please inform your subs and your lower tiers of prevailing wage requirements. If you have any questions, please visit the OLSC website for more information or contact the prevailing wage team directly.